Governor Barbour, again, thank you for jumping in the Shark Tank. I want to first talk to you about what's going on in the Middle East. Obviously, Egypt, new leadership now. We don't know what's going to happen with them. What do you think is happening with Algeria, Tunisia, Egypt? Do we see this, what's happening there? Do you think it's going to escalate? Do you think it's going to pose a bigger threat to the sovereignty of Israel? And how do you think President Obama, how do you think he'll play in all of this?
I don't think anybody foresaw what happened in Egypt. I think there's a likelihood that it was affected by what happened in Tunisia, and that it was probably really spontaneous, as advertised, so to be. I spent last week in Israel. While this was going on, I was in Israel. I met with President Peres, I met with Prime Minister Netanyahu and other Israelis whose opinions I respect. And their agencies did not see this coming. They did not predict it. So I'm not going to be critical of the Obama administration or the CIA for not foreseeing what the Israelis, who are right there next door and have a tremendous amount of back and forth with the Egyptians. So where do I think it's going? It's a hopeful sign that Mubarak has turned power over to the army. Some of us are old enough to remember that for many, many years, Turkey maintained a secular government, a very open government, a government, by the way, that happened to have very friendly trade and other relations, including military relations with Israel, even though it is an Arab country. And now that's changed in recent years. But the army in Turkey was critically important to keeping radicals from taking over the government, and hopefully the army in Egypt will play that same role, that they will ensure stability and that they will pave the way for honest, open, fair, free elections. We have to be very cognizant that back in 1979, the early days after the fall of the Shah looked kind of like this. Did not seem to be run by the Ayatollahs or by the radical Islam. Of course, it did not take too long before they took over. And you know, one of the first things they did, they shot all the senior military,
right.
Killed them all. And I have a feeling that the Egyptian military remembers that. So I'm hopeful that the peace treaty with Israel will continue to be honored by Egypt, that we will have honest, open elections, and that the government that is elected will be a secular government, a government that wants to have friendly relations with all of their neighbors. I can't speak for anybody. The American government can't tell Egypt what to do. We can't tell Israel what to do, and we shouldn't try. Not our job.
Well, President Obama was out in front, kind of pushing for President Hosni Mubarak to step down, to step aside, and let the process play out.
Letting the process play out is one thing. Mm-hmm. But how do you think the heads of governments in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, Pakistan, Colombia, other heads of governments around the world who are friends and allies to the United States, but are in areas where there is hostility, as we look to Colombia compared to what's going on in Venezuela, how do you think the heads of those governments felt when they saw our president calling for throwing the president of Egypt over the side? You can say what you want to about Mubarak, and certainly not a Democrat, he was an autocrat, and certainly there was much to criticize in the Egyptian government's behavior. But don't forget, for 30-something years, we had a stable peace, a peace treaty that wasn't just a piece of paper. It was abided by between Egypt and Israel. And Egypt, the biggest of all the Arab countries, when they did that, it changed the Middle East to place much, much safer, more peaceful, better for Israel, but better for everybody else. So, yeah, there's a lot to criticize about Mubarak, and hopefully what follows him will be better. But do not believe it is foreordained that what follows him will be better.
And then lastly, how great do you think this threat of the Muslim Brotherhood it's spreading through, it has spread to the Middle East, and it is here in the United States, how imminent do you think a threat is of that movement that would actually turn more violent, if you would?
Radical Islamic terrorism, as we look at the Muslim Brotherhood, Hezbollah, Hamas, a great deal of that is tied to the country of Iran. I think we have to understand that in terms of terrorism, Iran is the great strategic issue. If they get the bomb, what is the effect going to be on the rest of the world? What would have happened in 1991 if Iraq had the bomb? Because, you know, there had been a nuclear program there, and the Israelis blew up part of that facility in 1981. What a different strategic decision we would have faced in 1991 when Iraq invaded Kuwait. What would the Arab countries like Syria and Saudi Arabia, who joined us in the Gulf War, what would their attitude have been if there had been a nuclear power on the other side? Well, that's why Iran is presenting such a huge problem. They not only have a military nuclear program, but they are in the business of destabilizing governments, of delegitimizing Israel, of exporting terrorism and radical Islamist government, Shia.
Sharia.
Shias and Sunnis have not always have abided by Sharia. Even the Shiites have not always abided by Sharia. A lot of Shiites in Saudi Arabia, a lot of Shiites in Iraq, but they want to impose this on all Arabs, and then they want to use it as a way to destroy Western civilization, not just to destroy Israel, but destroy Western civilization, the values that we have that they find abhorrent. So how big a deal? It is a big deal. And it's not just a big deal to Israel. And we have to be cognizant of that. We can't let it turn our lives inside out. But war in Iraq, war in Afghanistan, yes. But in my view, the greater threat and therefore the greatest strategic issue is presented by the Iranians.
And lastly, I have to ask, are you still mulling over a presidential run?
I am. I mean, I'm not going to make a decision until April. I think I told you that when I saw you before.
I think you said you were going to break that news here on the Shark Tank. You said I have to meet old Sharko again, and I have to say, listen, I'm running, Javi. Back me.
That was the day you had your earplugs in.
No, that was 2 nights ago. She just kept yapping and yapping. I had to put them in. So you're still mulling it over.
I am, and I'll make a decision probably in April. That's my thinking, and I don't intend to make a decision before then.
And are you going to be spending a lot more time in Florida? Let me know.
I will. I'll be in Florida. I think we've already got a trip scheduled to Florida the next few weeks, but I can't tell you off the top of my head.
Okay, I'll find out. Governor Haley Barbour, thank you for jumping in the Shark Tank again. I appreciate it.
All right, Javi. Thanks for having me.